Aloha students, and I want to have a discussion about the purpose of this class and the purpose of general education here at BYU Hawaii. I don't know about you, but I was doing my undergraduate degree, and it wasn't that long ago because the Lord sent me back to school when I was 32 years old. He had a plan for me, I guess, and so I went back to school and did my bachelor's, master's and PhD in a 7-year period at BYU in Provo. And that was way too fast. Don't ever do that. It's kind of crazy. It was very tiring, but that's what the Lord wanted me to do, so He helped me do it. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, I really didn't want to do general education. To me, it was like a barrier that I didn't see why I was forced to take these classes, and I enjoyed some of them once I was in it, but my perspective was, coming from the British model where you don't do general education, you do 3 years of your major, and general education is something we do at high school, and we assume that the students have got enough of that general education, and that's how most countries do it. In the US they do it differently, and their belief is that this is how they're going to help create good citizens in society by giving you exposure to lots of different ideas, having you have the ability to think from different perspectives, and also some training about society and so that you can become good citizens. So this is the rationale behind general education. Now personally, I would choose not to have it in the format that it's in, but we have got it. So I don't think that many students really want to do it. That's what most people say, and so when they're taking an IDS class, it's kind of like you're forced to. And so I think to myself, well, that being the case, what value can we really have for this general education so that students can really feel like it's worth something to them? Because you know in your major, you understand why it's worth something because you're going to go into that job and you want to. So you feel it's value and you don't mind being challenged by the teachers. But in general education, many students don't resent a tough class because they wouldn't have chosen to do it and don't see that it's valid to their life and to their major. But I think there's one part of BYU Hawaii that is different. Remember the prophecies by President McKay. This whole university is based on prophetic prophecy about creating these people who are worth gold to the world, who will become leaders for and influence for peace in the world. This is a really important part of the mission of BYU Hawaii that we often forget, because this university exists for these prophetic purposes. Now that, to me, is interesting, and that is motivating, because if we can do something here at this university to create that kind of person, then that's really worthwhile to you and to the world. So as you think about that, as you think about how am I becoming this person I need to become to fulfill those prophecies given by a prophet of God about this campus, then I'd like you to think about this class in those terms, because as I was creating this class, being the director of the online program, there wasn't an online IDS class, and so I was volunteered to do one just so that the students could have this flexible option, and I had to do something that was within my scope of experience, and technology is my background. My PhD is in instructional psychology and technology, and I talk about some of the other things that I've thought a lot about, and neuroscience has been one of my hobbies. So all these things that I put into this class because we needed a flexible option for IDS. But then I really thought about, what is it that will be helpful to help students become these leaders who can be a force for good and for peace in this world. And the conclusion I come to is that facts and figures aren't that helpful in that goal. So if we teach you lots of dates from history and it's okay, it's fun to learn these things, but that's not going to help you become this genuine gold, these leaders for peace in the world. However, the ability to see things from multiple perspectives, and especially the ability to step out of your own perspective, to understand your own constraints that come to you through the culture you've grown up in, and understanding that there are many valid ways of seeing the same thing, and understanding that other people who've grown up in a different community see the world from a very different perspective based on their history, their traditions, and who's to say which one is right or wrong. If you can understand things from multiple perspectives, if you can understand your own, if you're willing to to be humble about your own perspective and more accepting about other people's perspectives, then you can see how to solve problems. You can see how to bring people together based on commonalities. You can see the reasons why people think and argue the way they do or make demands the way that they do because of their cultural backgrounds and their, our family backgrounds, the traditions that we grew up with that form this really strong map of the world in our brains that is very difficult to break free of. If you can understand all that, then maybe you will have what it takes to become these leaders who are a force for good and for peace and change in this world, good change. And I think that's an incredible opportunity. So my objective has been to make this class as conducive as possible to helping us all learn to see from other perspectives other than their own, and multiple perspectives, and understand that there are different perspectives and they're equally valid ways of viewing the same situation. And I think that if you can't do that, if you're so stuck on your own, or me, if I'm so stuck on my own perspective that I can't understand anybody else's perspective, then I'm never ever going to be able to solve really important problems. Because I'll only ever think from my narrow point of view that is so solidly concreted in my brain. But if I'm not willing to step out there and to admit that, you know what, maybe some of the things that my culture taught me aren't divine. Maybe they're not. Maybe there are other equally valid ways of viewing things. I'm going to take the example of the United States. In the United States, and to some degree this is true in Britain too, the idea of free speech is so important that it seems to drive a lot of other things, and it's used sometimes I think it's used as an excuse to allow things that maybe we shouldn't. There's something to think about. But because that cultural tradition is so strong, it's really hard to get around that. It's really hard for us to think outside of that box, to see things from other people's perspective. Now, some people grow up in countries where the idea of free speech, they haven't grown up with it in the same way. They see things from a slightly different perspective that might be equally as valid. Because you have to think to yourself, like even in the church, do we have completely free speech in the church? Kind of. But actually there are some things, if you say some things repeatedly, you're going to get excommunicated, because there is a balance between freedom and responsibility and consequences. So some cultures might focus really strongly on consequences. Some other cultures might focus really strongly on freedom, and others might focus really strongly on another aspect of that equation. But all those things are in that equation: responsibilities, the freedom to act, consequences. You know, there are many different aspects of the things that we think are natural human rights. There are different aspects of them, and different cultures seem to concentrate on one or the other, or different parts of those different parts of the equation, and come up with a different solution to the problem, which is how do we create a good society. There are a lot of governments or a lot of culture in the world who have tried to create what they consider to be the good society, and they have different ways of solving that problem. And just because in one culture we think that we have the divine way of solving that problem doesn't mean that it's perfectly suited. There may be parts of it that are really good, there may be other parts of it that are not, and we have to be able to admit that we don't have all of the right answers, that we might have part of the answers, but actually there might be a lot of common ground with cultures who underline or concentrate or emphasize another part of that solution to the problem, which is different from the part that we underline. So I hope this is making some kind of sense. It's challenging to us. I deliberately want us to feel challenged, so that we can kind of self-analyze why we feel so strongly about the things that we do feel so strongly about, and understand that some of those things, some of the things we were brought up with in our families, for example, are not necessarily correct, and that's okay. There are no perfect families, there are no perfect parents. We sometimes learn things better. I'll give you an example from my own life. My father, who's not a member of the church, he's a good man in many ways, very generous, trying to instill in us this idea of having to be the best at everything, or right, or argue for everything. Kind of a dominant kind of view of the world that basically says you've got to fight for what you're going to get. You've got to kind of be self-motivated, and there are some true elements to that. But the way it made me to be when I was young, I realised was kind of an ugly personality that I realised later I didn't like. And this idea of being so forceful and confident and dismissive of necessarily of other people and their abilities, just because that's the way my father saw the world. And it kind of made me act in a big-headed kind of way when I was young at school, and this was the way he had conditioned me to act, the way he was teaching me. And during my youth years, I kind of observed that this isn't very pleasant, and I started making changes, and I'm not at all like my father. I might have had, well, I try not to be, I probably do this. It's really difficult to escape from some of our parental ways. But for example, I don't mind being wrong, and my father can never admit to being wrong, because that's an ugly part of a personality that I don't agree with. And so I've escaped from that because it was wrong. Now I know a lot of people, and I've got a, I'll be careful how I say this, but there are family members who I can see who have not rejected some of those things, and who have to be right all the time and have to win, and you know, I don't like this. I don't mind losing. I don't mind losing an argument, because it's not about winning or losing. It's about people. It's about relationships. It's about how you take care of other people's feelings. That's more important than whether I'm right or wrong. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I have had to kind of bite the bullet and try and make changes and try and change my the patterns that I was given. So I have recognized that some of the things that I was taught in my family are incorrect. Even in the church, some of the things I've heard people being taught, not every church family is perfect. But you just believe what your parents teach you, and you kind of grow up that way. You have to, even in the church, you have to be able to analyze what you've been taught to see if it's correct, and study for yourself, because different families have some very interesting perspectives. I've heard of some families who are very politically articulate about the church, suggesting that the church is this side or that side of the political equation. They're very far right, or no, it should be more socialistic. That's what the church is, and teaching the children to be like this. So you get these children who grow up feeling really strongly about this side or that side of a political argument, and connecting it to the church, and that's totally false. All the things I've heard about that are not correct, and parents have incorrectly taught their children to connect a certain side of the political equation to the church, when that's not true. But how do you see that if that's what you were given, and you were given it in the context of the gospel, made to feel like it's kind of divine, and you feel like you're going to feel like you're guilty if you don't think that way later in life? These are very complex issues. And what I'm trying to say is that my goal in this class is to help us start the process of escaping from the things that are strongly our own perspectives, and humbly trying to set them aside and ponder to ourselves, is my perspective correct? What about this perspective? What if I had grown up in this culture? What if I had grown up in this family? How would I see the world? And is it any is it more right or less right than the way that I was brought up? And maybe there is very little of right and wrong about a lot of things. I've said before, and it is true, if you are correctly taught to live the gospel, and I mean live the gospel, I mean live like Christ lived, and follow his teachings, actually do the things he said, actually forgive people when they do bad things to you, and turn the other cheek, and be kind, and be the good Samaritan, and live the principles of the gospel. You can't go far wrong with those things, to be truthful. But outside of those really good, true things, a lot of it is just fluff that is just our family traditions and cultural traditions that I'm not sure that any is necessarily more right than any other. That's what I've concluded as I've pondered when I'm having a discussion that's kind of argumentative with somebody, and I've pondered afterwards. And I've tried to figure out why they were saying the things they were saying, why they were using the logic they were saying for that argument. What it turns out is, as I think about it, from their perspective, they're right. if they're using the formula that they're using to come up with their conclusion is correct. Now, I'm coming up with a different conclusion because the formula I'm using to come up with that conclusion is different. So if you can understand that the formula people have in different cultures to come up with their conclusion is different from your formula, which comes up with your conclusions, then maybe you'll be able to see the commonalities and be able to break down all of this fluff built up. Fluff, that's the wrong word. This kind of artificial truth that's built up by our societies and families and communities, that is not divine and not perfectly correct. It's all messy. There is some, you grow up in the church, you have some things that are concrete and truthful, but even then some of those things you see them through the eyes of your culture. So how do we really know that we're seeing it with a perfect perspective? It's not easy. So beware of that. Be very careful with thinking that your way of seeing something is the only and the correct way of seeing something. Have the humility to step back from yourself and see things from other people's formula. And if you start to see that there are other formulas than your own, and break down why it is you think the way that you think, then maybe you can be these incredible forces for good and for peace in this world. Because that's my expectation of you from you've come to this campus. That's what this campus is for. That's what the prophecies are about. That's what makes it different. And and this campus should help you gain those skills, or else it's not like any other campus. But that is what this campus is for, and there's power in that objective. Now, like I said before, I was not that keen on general education, but if I come to this campus and somebody was said, this is the objective of this campus, to create these peacemakers, these leaders of communities to bring about peace, these people of genuine gold, and that was the objective of certain classes. Now that would have been motivational to me, because that's a really important thing, and it's meaningful. It means something. So anyway, this is long. I'm going on. I think it's an important thing to remember. This assignment at this point, what I want you to do is I want you to think about this class so far. I want to think about how well you're doing. I want you to think about how you're doing in relationship to this objective I've just stated to you about being able to withdraw or being able to be self-critical and self-analytical about your own perspectives, and the ability to see other perspectives, why people think the way they do from their cultural backgrounds, their communities and traditions, so that how well you're doing in starting to understand that, and how well you're doing at being able to let go of the things that you believe, if necessary, to create peace.